Hello, thanks for stopping by. This is Gunslinger for the Atari 2600, released in 1978. This game is referred to as Gunslinger, or Outlaw, or maybe Outlaw Gunslinger, or possibly 16 telegames. Same game, different titles. It was actually based on an arcade game from a few years prior to 1978 called Gunfight. There appears to be an actual arcade game out there called Outlaw, although when I went looking for that game, it appears to be very different. Gunfight is the one that's similar to this one, although this one is certainly a bit more limited than that game. My particular copy is the Sears and Roebuck version, and it's called 16 Telegames. Mostly this means I get a boring label on the cartridge. I mean, at this point Sears is practically out of business, so historically, I don't know, I find this kind of interesting. Back then it was like Sears practically owned the world, so much that they could negotiate printing their own Atari consoles and games under their own brand. I'm pretty sure that doesn't happen with video games these days, at least not that I've seen. The box artwork for this particular game is really good, and it's different for the Sears version compared to the Atari version. Both have these really cool looking Western paintings. Now, like most Atari covers from that era, you have to remember, this was how they sold their games, so they kind of had to have something looking really nice on a box, even though that was something that most people probably threw away. Personally, I'm wondering if any of these paintings actually survived all this time. Are they hanging on somebody's wall somewhere, or are they just sitting in a garage on a shelf? Anyway, this is a David Crane game, one of his first actually, if not the first game he might have made for the system. He went on to make many other noteworthy games, like Pitfall, Ghostbusters, and actually A Boy and His Blob for the NES. Most recently, he made Circus Convoy for the Atari 2600. It was in a 2600 game that was released just last year. I'll actually link to a review of that game in the description. It's a pretty good game. So this is Outlaw, and it has a simple enough premise. Shoot the hell out of your opponent. You can play 1 or 2 players, and you have 99 seconds to beat your opponent. The first person to get to 10 hits wins. Or, if you manage to get through 99 seconds, the highest score wins. Think about that. You can take 10 bullets in this game. That's a lot of lead. When you do get shot in this game, I guess you do what everyone is supposed to do when they get shot. You sit down for half a second, and then jump back up to your feet, ready to get back in the fight. That's how it goes, right? Something like that? I don't know. So we get one button with the 2600. And that one button is just used to shoot your gun. If you hold the button down and you push up or down on the joystick, you can angle the gun up or down. This is useful because you can bounce bullets off the top and the bottom boundaries of the screen. More often than not, you're probably going to be shooting people using this method. Straight is pretty obvious. Angles, a little more difficult to navigate. Very important. So the breakdown goes like this. Player 1 is on the left, player 2 is on the right. There's going to be an object in the center of the screen. Some sort of a Western object. I don't know. Stagecoach, wall maybe, or a cactus, whatever. The game has 16 variations, and basically they have some functions that you can select. That will determine exactly how the game plays. 16 different styles of game, with little tweaks here and there. At first you get a handicap setting. A will make your bullets disappear in the air if you get shot, and B will let your bullets keep going if you get hit. Minor adjustment, but it does make a difference maybe. You can sort of get a suicide play that way. Now I'm not going to go through each individual configuration of the game. There is a grid in the manual that explains which particular games have what particular functions. But basically the first 12 games in this cart are 2-player games, and the last 4 are single-player games. The different effects are mixed and matched with each one, and the effects go like this. You might have what's called blowaway, meaning that you can shoot apart whatever object is in the center of the screen. Every time you shoot it with a bullet, a pixel disappears. There might be a cactus in the center of the screen that separates the gunslingers. It's just some sort of protection from your opponent. If you're not playing the level with blowaway, you're going to have to bounce your shots only off the top and the bottom, because that's really going to obstruct what you can do in the middle. There could also be a stagecoach in the middle of the screen, or a moving line of stagecoaches marching up the screen. Or there could just be a plain wall in the center dividing the shooters. Some games have what's called getaway, which means you can move immediately after you shoot your gun. If the game doesn't have this, you're going to stay in place until your bullet disappears off the screen. There's also an option called 6-shooter, where you get only 6 shots. You'll get 6 more shots after both shooters use all their ammunition. So if you unload 6 shots and your opponent unloads 0, they can basically control the screen until they run out of shots. There's also 1-player games at the end, and these are really just a target shoot. All you have to do is hit a target. Now all the games, 1 or 2 player, they just use different combinations of these above effects. Like I said, there's a grid in the manual. It was one of the early games for the 2600, and this early era in general, they seemed filled with a bunch of games that were just one screen worth of action. And it seems to me that these early days of the console, I guess like a lot of consoles, they tended to have slightly more basic games at the start of the life cycle, and they tended to have more complex ones near the end. And this is because developers were still learning how to maximize the capability of the hardware. This was an early era game. We've got one screen, we've got some basic gameplay. We have one screen and a bunch of different permutations in the same basic game, and those permutations are important because it really helps the game seem more appealing. It was something I actually saw a lot of on this system, especially early on. Games just have multiple variations with slight tweaks. You pull a cross-section of any of the early games in particular, you're going to find this sort of variety grid available to you. It's a basic game, alright, for sure, and there's no music to speak of in this one. Definitely not unusual for the Atari. I guess this is one of those you just probably going to want to pop something in your stereo when you want to play this one. In the solo modes, they're interesting enough. It's just you with a moving target on the opposite side of the screen. You just need to manipulate your shot to hit it 10 times as fast as you can. It's sort of a timed thing. The hardest one, I think, is the one with the moving stagecoaches. That one's really hard to manipulate. It's going to take a bit to get to 10 hits on this one. Something I find interesting in this one, your character can't turn around. So, for those levels that have the destructible center object, theoretically you can clear the screen and you can go walking around. You can walk right over on top of the other player. But if you position yourself behind the other player and pull the trigger, you're going to keep shooting off in the other direction, because you can't turn around. Now, the question becomes, of course, well, what are the odds somebody's actually going to do that, right? Honestly, I venture to say 90% of the kids that had this game in the 70s did this at one point or another. When you had a game with limited functions like this, you tended to play the heck out of them. Eventually, you're going to start wondering, well, what else can I do? And you're going to start messing with the game. I know my brothers and I did it anyway. We do this stuff all the time, absolutely. What can you do with it? Who knows? I think this one's okay for an early 2600 game. It's standard for that era, pre-80s really. It's the type of game that I see mostly being fun based on who you're playing against. It seems to me this is one of those games that's just designed to be a game that you taunt your opponent over. This is you trash-talking somebody to just make it more fun. Probably because there's nothing else to do in the game, really. I mean, you shoot, you aim, and you shoot again. A little taunting in a game like this, that's what I would expect. I have two brothers, and that's how we'd play a game like this, absolutely. That's where half the fun comes from. Well, that's all I have for Gunslinger for the Atari 2600. Of course, if you're interested in the channel, please feel free to like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for watching this one, and hope to catch you on another video.